Midday Treat with NAZ Elite, a monthly podcast in which I chat with HOKA NAZ Elite team members, and you'll get a behind-the-scenes scoop on their training, racing, and everyday lives. I'm your host, Eric Senseman. You can find our monthly podcast on SoundCloud by searching HOKA NAZ Elite, and you can learn more about the faces behind the team by visiting their website, nazelite.com, their Facebook page, Northern Arizona Elite, or their Instagram and Twitter, both at NAZ_Elite. In this episode, I welcome NAZ Elite's Ben Bruce. I think we had a very interesting conversation about the sport of running as a whole, in particular, how the sport can be quite different. It's just running, but depending on what event you're running, on what surface, the goals are very different, the training's very different, the fan bases are different, but of course there's some overlap. So we talk about all that with respect to events on the track, road running, from trails to much longer events beyond the marathon distance. Ben's seen success in most of those aspects of the sport, so it was neat to get his opinion on all those things, and I think you'll enjoy it. So put your feet up and have a listen. All right, this month I'm happy to join Ben Bruce on the podcast. Ben, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. We will discuss today, a little bit about Ben himself, but on a more general topic. We're going to discuss the differences between track, road, trail, ultra. Those are all sort of different parts of the sport.
It's all running.
It's all running. It is all running. So very different, though. In some ways, there's some similarities. We'll talk about it.
Yeah.
We'll talk about it. I want to start by allowing you, Ben, to talk a little bit about your experiences with, sort of those four different entities, or lack of experience,
okay,
whatever it might be.
Well, I started on the track primarily. I actually didn't run track in high school. I ran cross country, and then I would golf or I would play soccer in the winter because I lived in San Diego, so soccer was a winter sport because you can play outside all the time.
Right.
So if it rained on us, it was like, oh, this is crazy. And then in the spring, I would play golf. So, which was great because I get to play all these San Diego golf courses for free 4 or 5 days a week during the spring. And then, I went into college, was definitely a track cross-country guy. And then as I got older, moved into more roads, half marathons, but still kept the steeplechase going on the track and 5Ks, 10Ks on the track. And then within that, mixed in a few trail races. I've run the Xterra races back when I was in Bend, Oregon, the U.S. champs, and then the world champs they do in Hawaii.
Right.
So that's my kind of trail experiences. I've done a few smaller trail races just for fun. That was a local thing when I was living in Oregon. But no ultras yet. But living in Flagstaff, you can't help but see a lot of other guys and meet other people doing the ultras. So it is intriguing just to sort of follow it. It's such a different sport as far as what I like about the ultras is if you look at even marathoning, even a slow course to a fast course, the differential's really only going to be a few minutes unless it's a super gnarly road course that's known for that. But if you look at a trail ultra 100 miler,
sure,
a course to course can be 6 to 8 hour difference, even 10 hour difference for the winner. So it just becomes such you're running 100 miles, some hiking involved there, but some courses are all running, some courses are a lot of hiking. So it's always intriguing to be following one of those races on Twitter or something, and it's I'll take a nap and wake up and they're still racing, and then I'm watching my kids and it's I'll do an update. So it's just kind of interesting that I've been through racing miles that take 4 minutes all the way to now following and getting interested in seeing, just following along these races that take sometimes up to 20, 24 hours. So it's intriguing.
Yeah, so a widespread between those different categories and a lot of variability among them, I think is part of what you were pointing to. I think a good place to start is to talk about, I guess, what it takes from a training standpoint and racing standpoint to be successful in those different disciplines. So for example, you've run the steeple, obviously on the track in 8:19. You've run a half marathon on the road in 62 and change. You've also been at the Trail World Championships, which is 21K. So in looking at those three events, what are some of the differences you can talk about, and maybe some of the similarities in terms of what it takes to get ready for those events, how those differ, and then the actual race. Specifically, it's nice to compare like a road half marathon to a trail half marathon.
For me, when I did those trail half marathons, they were really like, I was living in Eugene, and a couple of days in Hawaii in December was sort of a nice break. So, I didn't train super specifically for those. Because I do feel at that type of trail distance, if you had, that course wasn't extremely technical or anything. I mean, it had a lot of ups and downs, but not a lot of technical stuff. So for that, it was more just, if you're really fit, you're still going to be able to race pretty well. But I definitely did see the difference the couple years that I was racing there against Max King, Joe Gray were kind of the guys I was racing those years. And they definitely have done a lot more trail running, I could tell, because I could keep up on all the non-technical sections, but I may lose, I might lose 30 seconds on Max on like a mile descent or something. And I was like, wow, I mean, how did that happen on these technical trails? But so I think for that type of half marathon road versus half marathon trail, getting in really good shape, because that is still pretty short for some of these trail races that are run. I definitely think if you went to longer trail racing, you definitely have to get more specific with that. And but what's great about it, you can do a little bit of each type of training within the training. Like if you're getting ready for a half marathon on the road, I think you can still go do a trail run here or there. It's not going to be all your runs, but on the contrary, if you're getting ready for a super long trail race or even a short trail race, you can't do all your running on the trails because it just sort of beats you up. I see ultra guys in Flagstaff out on Lake Mary Road knocking out like some 2-mile reps to sort of work on their speed. So you still have to hit all the different aspects of the running. So, but then if you compare that to running like the steeplechase, even though you're jumping stuff, it's so specific to being only a 3,000 meter race. So you know that you're training for when I was running at my peak. Like I'm like, this race is going to be between 8:15 and 8:40. You're looking at a 25-second window that you know how long you're going to be out there, just like pedal to the metal. So that was like much more specific on like the workouts and the times you're hitting on the paces. So that's probably a big difference on that. So. Yeah,
actually to speak to that, some of the NAZ Elite crew with Ben Rosario were out at Western States last year when Jim Walmsley was running, and they were down at the river about mile 78 to be there and see him come through. And unfortunately, Jim took longer than
having a tough one. At that point.
Yeah, and I remember I took the bus back up with Ben afterwards, and we had been down there for 3 or 4 hours. And he made this point. He was like, "Man, it's amazing. For me with the NAZ Elite crowd, they might be, 30 seconds later than I expect on at mile 12 of a race, right? Where here it's hours that can elapse.
Yeah, and things when they go downhill, you just have so many miles. It's like sometimes you get used to looking at races as this percentage. So it's like if you're 3 laps into a mile, you're like, oh, you're 75% done. Even if it goes terrible, it's 25. You have 25% to go.
Yeah, right.
But that's only 1 lap. So if you're 75 miles into a 100-mile race, 25% to go. That's 25 miles. So like that's still like an extremely like solid long run for any of us on a given weekend. So it just definitely is like a interest. Like how someone can just be crushing it, and then one thing goes, and that's what makes it kind of interesting to see all the different the aspects that go into it. Is just so different. And like anything, it's just learning what you can do and what works, and people taking risk like make it easier for the next person to take the risk, and so it's kind of cool.
Yeah, that is. So when it comes to the sport, obviously the money, the media, that sort of thing is more on the track and road side of things, and more significantly so. So I think those performances are what are looked at with more scrutiny and kind of given more Well, yeah, attention. So it's hard to compare performances across disciplines, even within the sport of running, for reasons we've mentioned. The different events are quite different. But in your mind, can you look at performances in different sports and kind of say like, oh yeah, those in my mind are all like equally impressive, or do you think that's a difficult thing to do? Yeah. Speak to that. Maybe.
I know what you're saying. Like, I think it's the longer a sport has been around and the more good people that have gone to it starts giving it more credit. And I think if you look at the marathon, that distance now, it's very popular. And when the running boom hit in like the 70s, people started running more, and you see like not only the world record but masses and the sub elites, all these times it started coming down because people were putting in more training. And so back when the world record was like 2:25, it started like coming down quickly, and because people were still like exploring that distance. And I think in the ultra world, the trail world right now, we don't really know where that scale is. It's become more popular. There's definitely been people with good track credentials moving to that. And so these records are being broken all over the place. And I think to like really answer that, you'd have to be able to like go like 20 years from now and see like, did the records keep getting broken, or like some of these records are still around, and then you can really justify that performance as incredible.
Right.
But then the other tricky aspect is like, if you have a 70-mile race and one year it's dry conditions and good weather, and the next year it's raining and muddy, someone could have ran an amazing performance and the time doesn't reflect it. So that's always hard to compare. And I think that with the trail running, there's more races that now are starting to put up prize money, and sponsors now are starting to put big money into their top athletes if they win these big races. So money's gonna push the sport to another level. That's just reality. If you have a super long, hard, grueling race and there's no money to be made, you can still have good people at it, but you're not going to have the depth and when you look at like road races that have raced like Boston Marathon, New York Marathon, they not only have great prize money, but they have appearance money and all this stuff. And that is starting to happen more and more. And I don't know all of those ins and outs, but I do know that it's now like happening, and that's gonna just make things bigger and bigger. And now I think races are gonna want the big names, and they're gonna be willing to pay for it. And I think that will just like, so it almost be interesting to see which of the major ultra races like 10 years from now are bigger, and which ones have like kind of not like lost their way, but just some new races might be just like pumping money in and getting all the big people, and they might become the like marquee events. It just remains to be seen. But 20 years from now, though, it still might be Western State, still might be the race to go to in the U.S. For a 100-miler to try to win. So maybe, but it could be a race that doesn't even exist now that someone makes up and makes it grand and big. So,
so you'll see. Kind of on this note, you'll see in forums or talk to people who are more on the track and road side, you'll hear arguments like, well, look, if you took a 2:06 marathoner and put him into, I think the argument goes a couple ways, but put him into a longer race like an ultra, or put him into a trail race, they're coming from a sport that's so competitive that they're towards the top of the sport. The trail and ultra side of things isn't as competitive, so that 2:06 guy, if he decided, could go over and just start winning everything. Do you think that? What do you think about that line of thinking? Do you think it's not that easy, or that maybe there's something to take from that?
I think it depends a lot on what they're racing in the course. If you take a 2:06 guy and he's running a 50K that's on service roads with a few single tracks and not many rocks, he probably will dominate it. But if you take him to Zagamar in Spain or something, and it's a marathon, but it's super technical downs and rocky. Yes, maybe if he's really sure-footed and he's run on that stuff, he might. But he might find himself in a whole different world of hurt that he's never, actually hurt. Maybe he falls down and he doesn't finish the race. So I would say if you took 10 2:06 guys and all of them went into, or let's say you took 10 2:08 2:10 guys.
Right.
Immerse them all in. I bet you 5 of them would probably suck just because they're so used to running on the roads and the trails is really bad. But maybe if a couple of those guys ran the steeplechase when they were younger or grew up living and running on some gnarly trails, maybe they would do well. So I don't think all 10 of them would be successful.
Yeah.
Because you see these ultra races sometimes won by guys that are just in the winter skiing, but like all of that skiing, all that downhill is that they did growing up as kids is made them used to being on the mountain.
Right.
They have strong quads for descending because if you descend and you can't get your legs back under you, you're just wrecked. So, and I saw that. I mean, the first year I ran Xterra, it was funny.
What year was that?
Maybe like in 2009. Maybe.
Okay, yeah.
I just remember like I tried like to the end to try to like hang with Max King as long as I could, and the next day I was staying with Max actually. So my wife Steph and I were staying with Max and his wife and a couple of their friends. We had this little like Airbnb rented, and the day after the race, like I'm walking down to Huntington Bay to snorkel, and I'm walking backwards because my quads are so wrecked. and I get back to the place and I ask Max, I'm like, "Are you sore? You gotta be sore." And he goes and he like bends down and like touches his like toe, and he's like, "Hey, my right hamstring's like a little tight." But he ran like 8 or 10 miles the next day. I suffered through like 30 minutes and just called it. But like, yeah, I mean, I just hadn't done as much preparation for that. And so it's like you get used to running on that. So it's a learned skill.
Yes.
So take a 206, 208 guy, put him in the race right away. I don't think he's successful.
Yeah.
Give him some time on the trails. Maybe he does become one of the best.
Sure.
But it's not guaranteed.
Guaranteed.
Yeah.
Right.
So
yeah, I was going to kind of move into the demands of the different aspects of the sport. Again, the track versus the road versus trail or ultras. And do you think that the demands in terms of training and racing are equal but different? Or, I mean, so you take a road marathoner, the guys and the ladies at the top of the sport, the amount of work you put in terms of mileage a week, in terms of getting into the weight room, I mean, just everything involved. Do you think that to be the best at the marathon, the demands are considerably different from being the best on the track or on the trails? Or
yeah, I mean, if you're looking at a 800 meter miler, I mean, they're gonna work definitely hard. They don't need to run as many miles, so maybe the actual time they're putting in running is less.
Right.
But they're probably going to be more beneficial from a little more gym work and getting explosive and ballistic work and plyos and all that stuff. So they'll still put in the time.
Sure.
And if you compare like a half marathon marathoner to one of the great ultra runners, the miles per week I feel is going to be about the same because yes, common sense would be like, oh, you're going to run a 100-mile race, you should run like 300 miles a week. But
in fact,
with running, you can't do that. If it's in cycling, swimming, you can accumulate just lots of time because there's no impact there. But I think with running, there's just an upper limit. And you can go put in like a gnarly week and run 150, 160, but I don't really know anyone that can sustain that for very long. So yeah, I think that there's similar demands from like a mileage standpoint. It's just the weeks look so different.
Yeah.
Like a marathoner's week's going to fall between 15 and 25 miles a day. And a lot of days are going to look very similar, and workouts are going to kind of fall in like a similar category. Where someone getting ready for an ultra race, maybe they run less miles Monday through Friday or however their week is, but then they slam Saturday. They go have some huge weekend. Right. The guys up here, girls up here will go down to Sedona and then go to the canyon the next day and just do all that and sort of go out and play. But then doesn't mean they're still working hard, because then in the winter I know a lot of ultra runners love to go ski and spin and all that stuff. And so I think maybe the time on feet might be longer, but the miles is similar. So you're doing these hard climbs and hard descents, and you're beating your body up probably similar aspects, just in different ways. In marathon training, you're like trying to nail like an exact time on a mile, where when you're out exploring trails, you're just putting the time on the feet, and you might hammer a climb and then take it easy coming down, or vice versa. But I think in any level of running at the top, people are putting in the work. And that's for sure. I mean, if there's ultra runners that come along in the next decade that break these records that are being set right now, it doesn't mean that the people now aren't putting in the work. it's like anything with a sport. They're also making people realize, like, yeah, this course record, we took 30 minutes off it, and then we took 10 minutes off it. And then as it gets faster, it's harder to take the time off.
Right. And so when it comes to, if we look at kind of the athletes that have been successful across these different disciplines, like we were speaking before we got started here today, but guys like Max King, like Patrick Smythe, Joe Gray, Andy Wacker, that have really shown, I mean, these are guys who have been All-Americans in college and who have set, the 100K American record in the case of Max. To some degree, there's just not an incentive to do it all, right? Yeah. Like, if you can be the best at one of those things, then that's sufficient, especially on the track and road. But do you think those guys are extremely unique, or do you think we see so little of that just for the reason I mentioned?
I think sometimes in those, that's such a great mix of guys because, some of them have gone to like longer races, 50K, 50 miles, 100Ks, but then like Joe Gray and Andy Wacker, like they haven't quite gone as far, but they are definitely, they're the type of guys that they'll just up for anything, run whatever race, whatever surface. They'll run a vertical K and they'll run a gnarly 30K road, like trail race, and then they'll run a half marathon on the roads and still run really fast. So I think all of them possess really good qualities at like a half marathon distance. And then it might just be as simple as like they wanted to explore, like their mind and what they like to do. I mean, I've always had a little bit of that. Like, I mean, when I was running Oregon Track Club in Eugene, there wasn't anyone else on our team that would try to be talking the coach into go run at Stara. And I would downplay it. I'm like, oh, it's just some trail race. Like, it's a trip to Hawaii. It's a trip to Hawaii. Like, I won't run it very hard. But like that to me broke up all the other training so that I could come back refreshed for like the track season. Because if I focused on trying to run the steeplechase like the full year, it was just so much of focus on that. So I think that, I mean, those guys are a group that just wanted to kind of explore that, and they like to go venture out and try new things, and so I mean, they obviously were very good at before they moved to that stuff.
Sure.
But, and I don't know. I mean, I know a lot of them personally pretty well, but I also don't know what their reasonings were. So I don't want to speak that just because they were right on the cusp of I've run 103 in the half marathon, but I would like to be running 101 if I want to try to win the national championship.
Sure.
So they're like, I'll just move on to something else and try to be the best there.
Right.
Or if they just wanted to move on because they wanted to move on. And move on is not the right word because they still occasionally come back.
Yeah.
And I think that's good for them because I think if you go into one thing full time, I think it hurts you. Like if you're like, all right, I'm only a marathoner, I'm going to run 2 or 3 marathons a year and that's all I'm going to race. I think after you see people do that for year after year, they eventually like need a break or they get hurt and they need to go back to like, I'm going to go run a track season and run the 5K, and that usually helps them when they go back to the marathon. And I think same thing with like ultras is sometimes it's like if you get so good at them, but then if you can't say no to like a race director and you pile on so many. I think Jim experienced a little bit of that last year.
Sure.
He had all this great success, and it was just like, it was insane how many of these long races he was running, and it just showed that like everyone can kind of just like eventually break down no matter how good things are going.
Right.
I seen that with my wife in road racing. She was having this was before we had kids, I think 2013. She was having this incredible year, and it's like you're making all this money on the roads, and it's hard for me to say don't go to this. Go to another race, and then you go to one too many and race one too many times, and then she got like a stress reaction in her femur, and it was like it worked out because we decided to have kids, and that was a good message, but yeah, so there's all that just goes into it. But it's kind of, that's why I think mixing it up is fun. And,
yeah. So do you? I wonder. And of course, we're speculating here, but that's fun.
It is fun. I love speculate.
The old
scientific speculation.
That's right. The armchair. We're gonna armchair this. Cool. But my question is, if you exclude, I don't know, the men and women at the very top of the track and field and road world, because I assume they'd have no. They wouldn't have a strong enough reason to move on to other things or to try other things. But as more money gets into the trail side, as more money gets into the ultra side, do you suspect that
that competition will come sort of as a result. Like you'll see more guys who are 103, who are 213, 215, whatever, that'll start saying, oh, there's an opportunity here. Maybe that's worth exploring.
Maybe, and I think even with, even if the money takes a while to get there, I think it's already happening because it's getting a little more public, and it's becoming, I think there's more races out there now that are becoming like ultra races versus just like completion.
Right.
And not that like trust me, anyone getting out there and completing 50K, 100K races, like, it's a long way to go.
Sure.
So, but now you're also bringing in this like intense competitive side to it, and races that maybe had 2 guys battling now have 5 guys battling, 6 guys battling. It starts to just bring more media and more interest into it. So I think that could happen regardless. And that's intriguing because I also feel there are people that just have their bread and butter. So some person that's like half marathoner might move up and realize like he or she was good at running an hour to hour and 10.
Yeah.
And running 4 hours, they're not good at it.
Just doesn't work. Right.
And then on the opposite side, there's some trail racers that I wouldn't say they get a bad rap, but I think sometimes think, they're doing ultras because they weren't fast enough. But if you think about it the other way, maybe they're doing ultras because that's where their skill set is.
Yep.
Like Camille Herron, like she's not going to blast a 10K.
Right.
But you run 100 miles she ran 100 miles. So like basically think about that. Like a pretty good guy going on a 25-mile run. Yeah. She's going to run with 4 of those guys separately and keep going. Right. So yeah, there's stuff like that she didn't have the like inherent speed to run a really fast 10K on the track. Yeah. But she's found that she can just keep going. Right. It's not a slow pace. It's just like a sustained pace that like a lot of people can run for a certain amount of time, but can you run that for 100 miles or 50 miles? So that's what's kind of would be interesting if more of these 102, 103 guys or 112, 110 girls moved into that sphere, because would they do it? Like, I don't know if I ratted out my wife. I don't know. I don't think she'd be very good trail racer. I don't see her being super great on all the technicals, ups and downs. And I've had people I've trained with where you go on like a run at, in a single track that has no rocks and they manage to fall 3 times. Like, I don't care if they're a 107 girl, they're probably not going to make it on the trail world if they can't get start to finish without falling 10 or 12 times. So it's a different realm.
Yeah, it is. And so we talked a little bit about the demands for these different events and how those demands differ. The obvious transition is from the shorter, faster stuff to the longer, more burly stuff, so to speak, going off-road, going longer. How difficult, just from a demand point of view, do you think it would be to do the opposite, to go from a guy or a lady who's running 50 miles on the trail, 100 miles on the trail, 50K, whatever, back down? Yeah, like to become I think half marathoner or marathoner.
What's hard with that question, like I don't think many people just have never run, wake up and decide I'm going to go run 50K or 50 miles or 100 miles.
Much smaller pool.
So I think, most people gradually get there and then they catch the bug. I think if you ask a lot of people running 100-mile races, in the back of their mind, they might not have set out to immediately run a 100-mile race, but they did like a 30K trail race and they're like close to them, and then that went to like, I'm gonna do a trail marathon, and then I'm gonna do a 50. And like it's the same thing with road racing. You kind of make the steps. So I think people usually that end up they just keep moving up, and if they either see success or they see enjoyment, that keeps them wanting to move up. Right. And then I don't think many people break into that top echelon on like long races without coming or trying out shorter distances first.
Sure. But and that's just natural.
Yeah, and it could. There are people that grew up skiing a lot and just running on the trails that never really had a desire to run shorter stuff. So I guess that would be the question of like, what can they do coming back down? And that's just, I think, a hard one to answer.
Yeah, right.
I don't know, the questions get thrown around like with like someone like Killian of like, what could you run in the marathon?
That's what I had in mind. Yep.
And he hasn't really run these shorter stuff, but it's no telling what he could do. But it's the same thing I was saying earlier about like you take a 208 guy and push him into the ultra, like right away, probably not. And being around, I'm around 4 2:12 marathoners every day, and I've seen the work they've done specifically for the marathon. Yeah. And I know their track times. And so also to think that a guy running these like super long ultra races could just step off of that and run 2:10, 2:11 right away. Like that's also pretty hard.
Yes.
Because there's so much that goes into it. Because in the marathon there is a lot about time. But now if you're talking the flattest course and it's 45 degrees out in perfect weather, that's obviously going to help. But that doesn't work a lot. Like take someone like Scott Smith on our team. He's run all these great marathons in the 2:16, 2:18 range, but it was in China and it was 80% humidity and 80 degrees at the World Champs, and he finished 15th or 16th at the World Champs, but the time didn't reflect what he did. And then he ran at the Olympic trials and he had a great race and finished just outside the top 10, and he ran like 2:16 or 2:18 or something that day, and it's
but in those conditions.
And then he finally got in Frankfurt last fall just a okay day. I mean, it was cool weather, but it was windy.
You're right.
And he wasn't even the best conditions, and then he put together the 2:12.
Yeah.
So there's so much of that to go into
Definitely.
to it. So I think that yes, if one of the top ultra guys committed a couple years to the marathon, it would be interesting to see what they do. But I don't think you could take them and just go right out, because that muscle. Because like in ultra, in trails, you're going up and you're using all these muscles. Yeah. And then you're going down and you're using a bunch of different muscles. Yeah. But if you're on a super flat marathon course, you're using the same set of muscles for 2+ hours, and and you're running within 5 seconds a mile every single mile, and that weirdly enough brings like a whole different aspect of like you're just using these same set of muscles over and over again. So, but it's like, will they handle it or not? Maybe, but it's the same thing as the marathoner going to the ultra. Yeah. They may handle it, they may not.
Right,
so,
right. Yeah, you know what would be an interesting case study there is if you looked at Comrades Marathon in South Africa, right? 87 or 89K, depending on the year. And some of these South Africans who run that, I mean, that's basically, they've not necessarily ever run a road marathon. Yeah. But they go out and run under 6 hours for 55 miles. Yeah, if you took someone like that who has more of that skill set, you know, that's ready, more ready for the
well, in that race too, it's long, but it is on the roads, and an up and a down year doesn't make a massive difference, because it is a net down 1 year and net up 1 year. Right. But when you spread something out over that many miles on the road without insane climbs like you might see at like UTMB, it's a race where you're running the entire time and within a very small window of pace when you compare it to something like an ultra race where you might have a 18-minute mile and you might have a 5-minute mile. So it's just it's a totally different I mean, it's a similar distance, but a very different.
There you're seeing real variation.
Yeah,
totally. So we've talked about fan bases, and I've mentioned, and I don't think this is up for debate, that the fan bases in the track and field and road world are far exceed, you know, the fan bases in the trail and ultra side of things. I'm curious what you think in terms of, so you've expressed interest in, you know, the trail stuff. You've again raced some trail races. You tend to follow ultra running, I think probably more than a road and track guy. But do you think in the long run, this, I guess, running for the amount of time that people run on the trails and ultras is interesting enough for it to ever develop a fan base like, you know, the track and the road?
Well, I'll say this: the ultra fan base may be smaller, but they're intense and they're very passionate. Mm-hmm. I think when you look at the marathon, like everyone loves to they want to like it because it's the marathon. It's like kids grow up in the U.S. wanting to run the mile. Yeah, and that's because you had this great miling thing that like came up with some of the greats back in the 50s and 60s that kind of kick-started that. Yeah. But you also, with the marathon, I think have like fans that kind of follow the sport, or they maybe follow what happens at New York City or Chicago or Boston, but they don't necessarily know what's going on these small ones. But I feel like the ultra fan base, like there's all these races that like they know what's going on. And I would admit to myself, like, I know quite a few, probably more than the average like track runner, road racer, but I still like every day like hear someone and I'm like, I'm not sure if that's like a well-known one and it's like it's a big deal to win or not. But I think it's interesting enough to follow. I know it's long, but you can still cover that. And I think that's what's great now is, yes, that was hard to cover 20 years ago.
Sure.
But now it's becoming easier to cover because people can be doing their stuff and they can be following it on Twitter and knowing when people are, if you're at the event, when people are coming in. And, seeing just how, like, things at the, like, aid stations at, like, the Javelina down in outside of Phoenix. And it's just people setting up these parties, but that's part of what you have to do because it's so much time. It's like what we were saying about Ben Rosario earlier. It's like, yeah, if we're doing a workout on Lake Mary Road, he knows about when we're going to get to certain mile marks. But out there, like, the amount of time people are coming to these aid stations is huge. So you got to set up a good atmosphere.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think that even though it's a smaller fan base, I think you see it with some of the popular trail runners. Like, they have a really, like, cult following, and I think that's cool. Versus sometimes on the roads, it's a big following, but sometimes it's maybe not as intense. So, yeah, I think that, and I think it's growing in the ultra world.
Sure.
And I think one limiting factor with it is ultras they're on trails mostly, or, like, limited areas where you can't have 40,000 people.
Right.
In the race.
No
I mean,
question.
unless you had a wave start that went on for 48 hours. You just can't do it where New York City can do 3 waves starting over the Verrazano Bridge and have people on both sides of the bridge, top and bottom, and like the course that doesn't merge till 3 miles and all that stuff.
Right.
So that brings the masses into running it, but sometimes the people running the marathon necessarily aren't fans of the top. Where I think more in the ultra world, like, everyone out there has a little bit of a interest in what's going on up at the front too.
Right. And we spoke about kind of that natural progression from the shorter stuff to the longer stuff. So the 14-year-old kid who wants to be a miler, or 12-year-old, whatever, eventually becomes a 5K guy, most likely, unless
a lot of times,
he or she is the best.
Yep.
And again, in a lot of cases, that 5K ends up becoming a 10K.
Push up.
Exactly, and eventually, for those at the top, you get to the marathon at some point. And occasionally into stuff longer. Do you think, as a fan of the sport of, say, a track and field event or road events, is following that longer stuff or that other event like trail stuff, do you think that it's as natural? Like, as you sort of stay in the sport, you kind of naturally become interested in these other things? Because you've mentioned, as you get older,
I don't think for as many people. I think a lot of times if you grew up on the track and then you did the roads, like, marathon is usually kind of becomes the end point.
Sure.
But that, because other than I would say, like, if you're looking at the mile and the marathon are, like, the glamour events. Like, you get asked, like, if you run in Boston, or what's your marathon time, or what's your mile time, and I kind of laugh a lot of times because, like, I think, like, if you look at all my PRs, they're, like, match up pretty well from everything from, like, the event above the mile to everything of the event below the marathon. So it's like, well, I've run a pretty mediocre marathon, and I've run, like, a decent mile compared, but, like, it's hard to explain, like, well, an 8:19 steeplechase is actually much better than running sub 4 minutes in the mile, but you can't compare that. So
right.
So I think that kind of becomes the end. That because you go at the great marathoners in the U.S., they were probably running the mile in high school. I remember when because like Ryan Hall is pretty close age to me. And I remember his senior year of high school, he went out to the state meet, California, and ran 60 point for the 1,600 meters, and ran like 4:01 or 4:02.
Yeah.
And he's, at that point, he's a high school kid, so you're like, this guy's a miler.
Yeah, right.
But you come to find out, I was like, no, he's an incredible marathon. And then you start hearing stories of, like, how in high school he was running these 10-mile workouts at close to 5-minute pace, like in Big Bear, as a high school kid.
God,
and it's just, you're like, well, duh, man. Writing was on the wall.
Yeah,
like, it took, even through college, it's like, he ran 13 teens in the 5K in college, which is incredible. But it showed that's incredible in its own, but it also showed, like, that was what he was doing off having such an aerobic machine to run a 2:06, 2:04 at Boston the year they had the nice tailwind, but, he's run a legitimate 2:06 marathon, which is, world class.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, by all means. So going back to the fan bases, you mentioned something that I thought worth exploring a little more, but so NAZ Elite in particular definitely tries to reach out to its fan base, to be transparent with its fan base. But like you said, it seems like on the track and road, those connections maybe aren't as Strong, I guess, for lack of a better word, is what you might see in the trail and ultra running
I would
world.
say they're.
That's right.
I would say they're strong. I just think that there's slight differences in, and maybe it's part like when you're at a trail race, like everyone's kind of there for the entirety. And sometimes at road races, there's a half marathon and a marathon going on, and some of the half marathoners finish and leave, and they don't even stick around.
Sure.
And not every ultra finisher that finishes sticks around, but when you see the atmosphere of like UTMB, it's like this. Every finish of every race, the whole town is just there's people everywhere, and I think that's that. I mean, I think with NAZ Elite and everyone on our team, and we have a lot of interactions, and I think that is a great testament that we have been sharing things, and the people like are starving for that. Like they want to see what's going on, and they want a little inside scoop into things.
Sure.
And that's not everyone's cup of tea. I mean, not some groups don't like to share the details, but we do, and I think we have great interactions. And I think the bottom line is if you are approachable from fans, then you'll have great interactions with fans. So I think it does also rely on the person of the group too for that type of fan base. So.
And so I guess do you see the road running and track culture as more I don't want to say secretive, but the guys and women at the top and the top coaches have more reason to withhold more information than maybe on the trail and ultra side of things? Just from a competitive
I could
standpoint?
see some people's reasoning for hiding stuff, but I always believe in this, like, if I share my training with you, unless every single tiny detail is there, and you listen to every detail, it doesn't really matter, because for one example, we live at 7,000 feet. If people have never trained at altitude, or they don't know about altitude, they might see a workout and be like, oh, how bad is altitude? But it's also shown time and time again when like Kellen and Steph getting ready for New York last year, they're running 550 pace for workouts at Lake Mary, and then they go and run 535 540s. I guess they ended up 543 average in New York, but New York's also like a tough course. So they run several 10 seconds or so faster per mile on a tough, not an easy marathon course, on not a super day. And so like those things showed, but so it's like if I share my training, it's like how do you convert that if you're living in LA,
absolutely,
running your runs on the beach, or you're doing your runs on hilly terrain. So I know when I like another example of that, like in college, where I went to college, Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, we ran up in the hills and cow pastures and up on railroad tracks. So our long runs, maybe a 15-mile long run takes us hour 45 in college, 7-minute pace roughly. But then our rival school, Santa Barbara, they're doing a lot of their long runs on like the bluffs or these flat bike paths by the beach, and it's still a long run, still training, but their long runs might have been 10 minutes faster over 15 miles.
Right.
Similar training, so it's like if we went out and tried to run 620 pace on our runs, we'd probably run ourselves into the ground. So unless every single detail is put out there, I don't see a problem with sharing some stuff. I mean, if you say I did 10 times 467, I mean, did I take a minute rest? Did I take 4 minutes rest? I mean, and what did I do the day before? Did I have an off day? And what did I do the day after? So it's, and then like I said, if people don't want to share it, they don't. I mean, everyone has a story they can share. Or whatever, some runners don't share anything in their workouts, but people love to follow them because they think their dog's cute or something. I mean, and then from the fan base side too, because some people oh, this person always posts about their cat, and some are like, I love them posting about their cat. So I think you just have to kind of put out what you want, and the fans that like what you do will like you, and that's what, there's a lot of characters and personalities to go around, so it's fine.
That is fine. That's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. It's okay.
I was recently told while I was on a podcast by the host that their opinion was, well, they've begun interviewing more ultra runners than they intended when they started the podcast. It's more of a, we're just going to interview runners, so they do. Track guys, road guys, whatever. And they said they naturally just began to interview more ultra runners because they found that the personalities were more interesting. So it seems wrong to just make that generalized claim. But I guess my question to you would be, in kind of having a foot in both worlds to some degree, do you think that's necessarily the case, or do you think that road marathoners are just more focused, and so they're not going to sort of be let as much out? I don't know. I
think that sometimes if you're running a lot of I don't know. I don't know the answer to that fully.
Yeah, sure,
but
sure.
I think that, to your point, I do think if you group things in like classify people as a group, I would say if you took a bunch of ultra runners, there is going to be some more personality and like interesting thoughts, because I think sometimes they're still exploring some training, and and one person's training is going to look super different, and some of the stuff they do is totally gnarly or not traditional. And someone's like Rivers, Thomas Rivers, that lives in town. Like last year before Boston, he finished 16th, which was like no one would have picked him to finish 16th. But he was running down Snowball like the weeks before Boston Marathon, just like all this crazy downhill.
Right, so like 2,000 feet of descent.
We want to do, because Kellen and Scott getting ready for Boston right now. They're doing a lot of downhill, but it's to like a plan.
Yeah.
Like a meticulous plan. So I don't know if sometimes that meticulous plan goes off on the personality, but I think also sometimes people maybe have these personalities, but they like bury them because they're trying to like, because sometimes you go to a track race and they're like, here's the pacer, they're going to run this exact pace for this amount of laps, and then they're going to step off, so everyone kind of goes into like robot mode to try to run fast.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Where then like an ultra race is like, well, you got this guy that's training in the Alps, and you got this guy that's training, no one really knows what's going on, and the race goes off, and it's like someone might go out and run 5 minutes the first mile of a 50 miler, but then it might go out and everyone's kind of jogging and seeing who's going to take the lead. So I think that leads to a little more personality in it. And I think the atmosphere of it, that you see these ultra races, and the night before they're doing like a beer mile. I mean, not
it's okay to be,
not necessarily the people that are competing in it, but some people that are competing in it, or like. Yeah, so I think it's a little, like, the culture makes it a little more okay to be out there.
Yeah.
Where sometimes, like, like, you go to these, like, I mean, I've run Diamond Leagues where it's like you're in a call room 25 minutes before the race, and it's like they're just locked you in here. It's like you're in this room and you can't leave, and then it's like, okay, you're on the track and we're on a TV schedule, and like sometimes you get on the track and they're like, oh, well, we have a delay, so you're here for 10 minutes, and sometimes you're on the track and they're lining you up and they're like, go, and it's like, so all this, you're like being corralled around.
Sure.
So I think that can lead a little bit to the culture, and I think you look at when people are watching big track meets on TV or the Olympics, everyone just assumes that they're like almost watching robots, where like they do have those people do have nerves, and they might have been super nervous before the race. They have lives that go on, but it kind of it's been played over the years that it's like, oh, they have like no emotions and no feelings, and they go out there, but I mean there is a lot in there
behind all that.
Right. So. But I think that there's still a lot of great track personalities out there, but I think sometimes it can be limited. And I think when you mentioned about the culture, it could be big, because I know there's been stories where some sponsors of track athletes have like even almost tried to curb people's, I think, natural personalities.
Yeah.
Like someone makes a funny video throwing snowballs with their friend, and the company's like, well, that's not really like the professional life we want putting out there. But if that's that person's personality, they're probably going to run better by making those dumb videos and being happy. Yes, of course. And they got hurt making some stupid video. Everyone will feel terrible. But I think if you limit someone too much in their own life, and they're not happy, they're not going to race well anyway. So,
You mentioned something I think worth going back to with respect to to Tommy Rivers, who finished 16th at Boston. I guess it was last year.
It was last year.
Yeah. And you mentioned how his training was maybe not traditional. Yeah. So here's a question. With respect to ultras, I think there's a lot of just unexplored territory. So you don't have these I guess pretty specific like formulas to get to the result you want. Do you think in the road and track side of things, specifically the marathon and the marquee events, that the training methods have been tried and true to the extent that there's not going to be we're not going to see any more variation in that sort of training?
I think there's like certain variations that people go with, and there still are different ones, but it's been tried and I think it does help, but that's a great example that in will the ultra world ever have tried and tested things? Maybe not, because it seems like people at this point have been able to be successful doing a lot of different things. Yeah. Some people ski the whole winter and they barely run because they love to do that, and they live in a place that you can do that.
Sure.
Have we seen a lot of success of ultra runners generally training at altitude? Yeah, but there are still some good ones that don't train at altitude.
Definitely.
And I think that almost your point about the eclectic mix, that because there's more exploring going on, it's sort of like, yeah, I just did this and it worked, it didn't work. But then it's like when you get into having these exact splits, and I think, talking with Coach Ben Rosario, like how we sometimes can get too much into that. So for like a great example of the workout the team did today was, we kind of went back to like it was like a newer workout that wasn't exact and had like the first tempo was downhill where we didn't know what to run.
Sure.
It was kind of like an estimate.
Yeah.
And I think that's so much more in the ultra right now of like
Definitely.
An estimate of like, I'm going to go run for 3 hours and try to get, 10,000 feet of vert or something and just go up and down, or I'm going to just go run 20 miles on a road straight out and just see how fast I can do it and kind of mix it up. Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like you see more of that as you add variables, right?
Yeah.
Like you would almost never see that in the case of a 100-meter track runner, right?
Right.
Like nothing of that nature. But as you get further
away,
yeah.
And I think you can almost be more successful at the longer races with different types of training, because when it comes down to racing, those super long races, the person that could be in the best shape and the most ready, like if their stomach turns on them and they can't eat, they can't get to the finish line.
Right.
So, and that can happen in the marathon.
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah, to an extent.
But then even like at the half marathon, it's almost, you can get a cramp, but like from a fueling standpoint, for the top athletes, like unless it's super hot, super humid, you don't really need to fuel during the race of a half marathon. Like if it's 55 degrees out and I'm running half marathon, I won't take anything.
Right.
I may grab a cup of water and throw it in my face if I'm hot. But you just don't need it.
Yeah.
But when so there's a lot more that goes into it. But because of that, almost like a lot, in a way, like less thinking. It's like we talked about earlier, like the hard work. Everyone's working hard at all the different disciplines, but it's almost because how unpredictable. It's like the longer the race you go, the more unpredictable it is. So almost it's like, well, you might as well make the training more unpredictable
too. That's a good point. So, you're just mirroring.
If you're running a mile on the track, you know exactly. So you're going, what's going to do 8 quarters at mile pace of a minute rest, and this is going to be a great workout. But in a long race, like, well, you could be in great shape, and things could go terribly wrong.
Yep.
So,
or you'll be depleted towards the end, so you should not eat for 20 hours and go run in training.
The 7-minute mile at the beginning that felt super easy, you would pay $100 to do one of those at the end. And you're running 9:30 and
that's just
pain, So
so it was recently announced, I think we'll wrap up here, recently announced that you will be joining the ranks of Coach Ben. There will be a second Coach Ben.
Yeah, that was part of the prerequisite. Ben,
you have to be a Ben.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I'm curious, given the topics we're covering today, if as a coach, and I know you have experience previously, not outside of NAZ Elite, but wait, is that true? You've done some coaching.
Yeah,
a lot of
it's kind of like my running. I've coached like lots of different levels.
Yeah. Okay, that's what I thought. Do you think you're in a position, given the different events that you've competed in, given some of your interests, like being intrigued by the ultra world, do you think you're in a better position as a coach to kind of use all those data points and as a result maybe have a little bit different type of training than is traditional, or than you might expect from just the hard line like track coach and that's all he's ever done? Do you think that's beneficial? Like, where do you see that playing in?
Yeah, I think two things. I've had some really good coaches in my own career at different levels. My junior college coach, Manny Batista, was he not only coached us, but he taught us about coaching. And then when I went to Cal Poly, Mark Conover, he's 1988 Olympic trials marathon champ. He was kind of like an old school, like, you train, you get fit, don't worry about the specifics. He had workouts 80s. That he did. That we did every year. It's like you almost could predict what we were going to do.
Sure.
And I saw how that could work. I saw how that didn't work for some people. And then I went to Eugene and was with Mark Rowland, and he came from such a great track background. He was a bronze medalist in the steeplechase, I think in Seoul. And so I got to see this great steeplechaser who joked that he didn't even like to coach the steeplechase. He preferred to call the mile. He actually said the steeplechase is a dumb event. He doesn't know why he ran it. Interesting for a medalist to say that. And then coming here and being coached by Ben Rosario, and he came from like a Hanson's type of background, of very marathon based. So I've seen like a coach training world-class 800-meter runners, and then to come here and see the success in the marathon, and like kind of everything in between. So I think that has helped. And then also like my own coaching experience, like when I graduated Cal Poly, I stuck around for a few years and was a grad assistant, and my primary role was to coach the steeplers because Mark Conover didn't know much about the event. So,
Sure.
So he did all the workouts and wrote all the workouts, but I focused on, working on their techniques and we're in the breaking down of how to run a good race in the steeplechase.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I'm excited to go into this role, and I've already been in the role for, this year as the assistant coach of the NAZ crew, and it's kind of like a good stepping stone for me because I'm 35 and it's like Father Time eventually catches up to everyone. I still feel like I have years of my own career left, but it's a great way to transition into like something that I know I'd probably eventually go into. And it's a good mix because Ben calls all the shots, but I can give him a outside perspective, and he can call me versus having to probably talk his wife's ear off about training she might not want to hear about.
Jen loves talking about running all the time.
Yeah, so, and I see that the amount of times we have talks now probably makes me realize more how much he probably ran stuff by Jen. And but yeah, it's exciting because I also have, such an investment in all these guys and girls on the team.
Certainly.
It's my wife and the guys that I've already trained with for all these years, and I will train with again.
Right.
And these incredible women, and then there's also this transition where someone like Alafine and Footsum, who are newer to the team, they come in and it's like they know me as a coach from the beginning, kind of. So
right.
I think it'll be exciting with the new people coming in that they'll come in and they'll be like, oh, there's two coach
that
beds.
dynamic's there.
The dynamic's there. But I still feel like that mutual respect with the other guys on the team that I've trained with, that's like, I think they can understand that, like, I know what they're going through. Same as Coach Ben. He's run great races in his own career too. So it's like, we come from a standpoint of athletes, but we also love the coaching aspect of it. So
sure.
Yeah, it's exciting for me to be going into this. And I guess if you have two toddlers, why not bring more stuff into your life? I think that's generally how people
two
do
toddlers.
stuff.
Yeah, it's not enough. It's not enough.
Yeah, so I'm kind of the player coach for NAZ Elite. And
what do we say? The Babe Ruth of the Babe Ruth of the running scene.
Yeah, so hopefully I can get some more home runs left. Although I always believe in base hits, score runs versus hitting home runs.
I just read that quote when I was doing a little research ahead of time. That's a good quote.
Yeah, it's kind of made it up myself. I'm sure someone said that.
Right.
It's basically for people. I kind of go by the process that, like, you don't. Not every workout has to be a home run.
Yep.
And because in baseball, like, base hits get you on base, and base hits score runs, and runs win games. So I kind of like take that process into my own running and into coaching, that nailing one big workout's great, but hitting 8 or 9 out of 10 on a medium high level is good.
Yeah,
and having a bad one here and there versus like the up and down. So if you always swing for the fences, you don't always hit home runs.
That's right.
I've taken my swings.
Sure.
In my races, and I've failed, but I think in the training you have to keep that level head, and I think that will transfer over to coaching because it can be.
It's consistent.
You have to be consistent.
Yeah.
You have to be the consistency for the athlete.
Right.
Because if you get too over emotional one way or the other, good or bad, if they have a great workout and you get so over the top, like, that was the greatest thing I've ever seen, and then they take almost an overconfidence into a race. But at the same time, you got to sort of pick them off the ground when things are going bad, and everything in between. So
of course, yeah.
But it's good fun. So I'm looking forward to it, and we'll see.
Yeah. Good. Well, I've been here with Ben Bruce, chatting about the differences between the track, road, trail, and ultra scenes. We hope you've enjoyed it. Ben, thanks for joining me.
Yeah.
We'll see you next time.
High fives.
All right. We should end every one that way.
Yeah, we could do it.
Five.
Yeah, and then like some chatter after, and then
just
the editing just
cut.
Slow thing, and maybe some papers like in the newsroom.